This is the Norris Group's Real Estate Investor Radio Show, the award-winning show dedicated to thought leaders shaping the real estate industry and local experts revealing their insider tips to succeed in an ever-changing real estate market. Hosted by author, investor, and hard money lender, Bruce Norris.
Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Bruce Norris, and today we have a very special guest, Sean O'Toole. Sean O'Toole is CEO, founder of PropertyRadar, the property data and owner information platform real estate pros have trusted since 2007 to do billions of dollars in deals. Sean got to start with data in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. After the dot-com bubble burst, Sean flipped properties for 5 years, getting out near the peak. Sean launched ForeclosureRadar in early 2007 before anyone heard the foreclosure crisis was coming. In 2013, he relaunched ForeclosureRadar as PropertyRadar, a greatly expanded property data and owner information platform, serving a broader audience of real estate professionals. Today, PropertyRadar remains the go-to platform for data-driven real estate professionals intent on leveraging comprehensive property data and owner information to grow their business directly. John, it's been a long time. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Things are really good for us.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. You know, it's funny. I thought about you and a lunch that we had with somebody a long time ago. You remember Eric Jensen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I just opened his book, and it has a lot to do with talking about inflation and all the policies and things like that. And I even looked up online to see if he'd written a sequel. Do you still know? Are you in contact with him at all?
I am. And he's actually the founder now of a pretty innovative virtual reality company. And we'll still talk a little bit of economics, but he's not putting the time and effort into that, at least publicly, as he was before.
Okay. Well, I know we're going to cross into some of that world too, virtual reality. So since you brought it up, how does that create revenue for him, and what does that entail? I'm just curious.
So he started off with an exercise bike, and that was gamified. So you put on the goggles, the virtual reality goggles, and it transports you into a different world, and you're on a bike. And then he had different games and but for example, you could fly, and the faster you pedal, the higher you go, and things like that, and kind of trying to gamify exercise and make it fun. And and I still think they do that, but they have a really innovative. One of the hard parts in virtual reality is how do you move around, right? Because you're usually stuck in one place or in a small room. So how do you pretend like you're running across great areas or things like that?
I've seen some funny videos where people actually attempt to do that and smash their TV off of the wall.
Oh, totally. Happens all the time. For the Facebook, the Oculus one, Bruce, there is an amazing boxing game that I think you would absolutely love, and you can box with friends. So you and I could, across the country, put these things on and have a boxing match just for fun. I think people would pay to watch that.
Oh my God. You know what's so funny about, one of the things that I remember most about you and my interaction is every time we're going to the event at the Nixon Library, and we're in the limo, and we're just talking, and you bring up stuff I've never even heard about every time. So you're talking about 3D printing. Now this is a long time ago. And I'm like, what? And you tell me what it is, and I'm just going. And I get home that night, and I remember I have to look this up, and there was already an example there was this kid that was born with a defective heart, and they took a scan of his heart and printed his heart so the doctor could hold the defective heart and know exactly where to fix it. I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's just crazy stuff. Now, your son is involved in something that's connected with 3D printing as a business, right?
He has a 3D printing business and he's in school for mechanical engineering. So yeah, that definitely has done a lot there.
Well, what was cool about that, that was well thought out, because I remember you go back to your being young, your dad bought you a present when you were 10.
Yeah,
And what was that present?
it was an Apple II, and
Okay.
yeah, early Apple II. So 1978. I was born in 67, but I was still 10 in 78. And yeah, and it really, changed my life. I went out and did sailing and did normal kid stuff during the day, but my bedroom was on the other end of the house from my parents, and so
Mm-hmm.
I would stay up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, playing with this computer. And there wasn't much to do with computers, and there weren't a lot of games and stuff. So I learned to program, and it gave me every real opportunity I've had an adult in my life.
Well, you also improved an entire industry.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
actually, there's no doubt about that, because that's one of the things that Foreclosure Radar, after the .com stuff, and you kind of, how did you get into the property buying business, by the way? Because that wasn't an easy transfer of, what you were doing to that.
yeah, it's a little bit of a long story. I'll try to make it super
That
short.
that's all right.
After the .com crash, I left Silicon Valley, moved to my vacation house, took a year off, but started hanging out with a buddy who had all this. I was not working. This guy across the street had all this free time. He was a commercial real estate developer, but he was making a few $1,000,000 a year, or maybe more, right? And he had all this free time, and I was really like, how does
What do
that
you
work,
do?
right? What do you do? And he introduced me to a friend of his that was buying foreclosures and literally like writing stuff down on Polaroids and keeping these things in a shoebox to kind of organize. And he's like, you got to go write software for this guy. And, we talk about in California, the 40 thieves. And I'm like, I'm not writing software for 40 people. I want to write software for millions, right?
Right.
But then he gave me his deals, and I saw the profits he was making, and I did okay in Silicon Valley. And I'm like, well, if I can make that kind of money and have my friend's lifestyle, yeah, that sounds better than going back to Silicon Valley and killing myself in another startup.
I remember the yield was some ridiculous thing. I remember you asked him for basically his annual yield, and it was like 70 or some percent.
80 and he didn't know, right? So he
Right.
had
I
no
remember that.
idea. And so he finally said, well, here's all my files for last year. And he had these meticulous file folders, each one like an inch thick. And he said, why don't you take all of my deals for the last year? And because what I wanted to know, I can see how you can make money on a deal, but can you keep
Right.
your money invested often enough that if you have a pool of capital that you can make a decent return on that, right? Because
Right.
you got $2,000,000, but you only do 2 deals in a year, and you make a really good return on those 2 deals, but it may not make a very good return on the money. So I wanted to
Yeah,
know
you have
its
too much
return on
dorm.
capital,
Right.
including when it sat in the bank, and it was an 80% annual return on his pool of capital, even with the time it sat in the bank.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah. Well, when you got in, there wasn't really a reliable source of data. It was treacherous, and it was always wrong and
Yeah.
inaccurate. You spent so much time going to sales that never were going to occur that day. It was tough, and it wasn't inexpensive either. The data wasn't inexpensive.
The data that was available wasn't inexpensive for sure. And, and that's just my nature, right? I'm a software guy, problem solver. And so I faced that problem early on, built a system for myself. And then in 2000, took that and made it available we had to rebuild it. So when I made it for myself, it was for tech folks out there, was single tenant. I needed to rebuild it as a multi-tenant solution. In other words, handle lots of customers rather than just one, me.
Yeah.
But rebuilt the whole thing, and that's what I went to market with in 2007.
And you changed the cost of getting the data by, I mean, probably 90%. It was crazy.
Well, it was kind of dumb, so you had the Realty Track and foreclosure.com folks out there that charged $50 a month for notices, but you couldn't really use those services to go bid at the trustee sale auctions. And the services that did help you get data that was, more timely, more accurate, et cetera, that you could use for that still didn't include like transaction history, title history, that kind of stuff. Were very expensive. And that's kind of what I had built for myself. But the only pricing out there was these, low end, foreclosure notice services, Realty Track and Foreclosure, and they charge $50. So I charged $50. I probably could have charged 5,000, and was dumb.
Yeah, you'd have had less of an audience, but the guys that paid the $5,000 that did it full time would go and recognize the value. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I got so many phone calls from the long-term players going, well, what are you doing? You're not charging enough for this, and you're going to create too many competitors. And we're angry that you're not charging.
Well, that's interesting that is said, because when I went to the trustee sale business originally, I mean, if there were 3 people there, including you, that was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have an audience now, like it's a public auction, it's like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it definitely made it easier for many more people to participate. That's for sure. Again, when we were in that limo, there were a couple things that came up, and I'm really trying to think about one of the things that you said to me, and I always thought about this, is that one of the main problems that we're going to have to think about is how to have society when we have 50% unemployment. And, if I didn't know you, I'd blow that off and go, okay, well, that's ridiculous. But then I start looking at some of these things. Like if I watch Elon Musk's factory build cars, there's an element that's missing. It's a human being. And then you look at the self-driving cars making progression. And you and I talked about that. I had never even heard of that concept until I was in that limo one year. So that was, you knew that way, way before that was coming.
And they don't talk about this much, but go look at the stats on McDonald's and the number of people they employ. So McDonald's has been deploying more and more technology in their stores. And I think their total employment, I don't have the stats right in front of me, but something like 50%. And that's not because they closed half their stores.
Wow.
And I could be off there because I haven't followed it that closely, but there's lots of examples of this in places that you wouldn't think, in places where you don't see.
Well, yeah, that, just happened to watch some things about Elon Musk, because one of the articles or programs I just saw is that he's reduced his robots by 80% in the front portion of building the Tesla. And you're going, okay, they eliminated 100% of the people on the front end, and now they're replacing the robots with more efficient. So I'll just kind of shake your head and go, okay, wow.
Bruce, I was just watching an episode of the Mandalorian last night, and they were in this world where the robots were doing all of the work. They had voted to have the robots do all of the work. They had some rogue robots that were like hurting people. And so the question was like, well, why don't you just turn the robots off? You're in control. Oh, no, we can't do that, because then nobody would be able to do anything. They really couldn't do anything because the robots had taken over every aspect of labor and everything in this world. It's funny.
So I just looked up the McDonald's stats. So number of McDonald's locations in 2022 was 40,000, right?
Okay.
In 2012, it was 34,000.
Okay.
And in 2012, they had 440,000 employees, and today they have 150,000.
Oh. Are they selling less burgers?
Well, no, and their revenues are up as well, and their profitability was one of the, like, I think in 2021 it was one of their highest profit years in a long time. So Yeah, I mean, it's one of well, here's their annual revenue was 23 billion in 2022. It was 27 billion in 2012. So the revenue is down some, but revenue's down about 10% and employment's down what?
So 60%.
60%.
Wow. That's really interesting. Okay. When we originally talked about this self-driving cars, you were trying to explain to me, because I said, I remember saying this almost exactly. I said, oh yeah, I can't wait till I'm driving next to an unmanned car, basically.
I can.
And you said to me that, well, the car will be driving safer than you can. And you tried to explain to me that simultaneously that computer is making the best decision, not just to avoid something with me, but to avoid something with everything at the same time. And
Right.
then remember the rock, paper, scissors example you used, that if you play that game against this computer, you get beat 100% of the time because it picks up what you're going to do. So how far has that progressed? And the reason that's what industry does that disrupt more than any?
Yeah, I think, so, and I'm going to just backtrack just a little bit, right?
Okay.
One of the things on like self-driving cars is I believe in that statement in the long term, and in most scenarios, right? The reaction of the computer is faster than our human reaction, period, right?
Okay.
So that's true. What gets hard is all the things that happen in the real world, right? Like, I live in snow country, and right now most of the lines are missing from the roads. But
Yeah.
I kind of know where those lines used to be. I kind of have a feel for it, right? Like, and I have a car that has a self-driving mode, and the lines go away and it goes, and it can't do anything. So training, I guess there's a difference. So the reaction time's better than humans, right?
Right.
But the best computers are nowhere near our brain, right? So there's this balance of things, and it's getting better and better. Moore's law, computer power continues to increase. These models continue to increase. You take something like ChatGPT, I don't know if you're following that, large language models. They can take way more information than we ever personally can.
Yeah.
But the computers that are processing that information still aren't as powerful as our mind. So there is a balance there, where and the last 1%, 2%, like getting most of self-driving working is really pretty easy. Like you can do that as a high school kid if you go dive into this stuff.
Okay.
But getting that last few percent right, which really is what's going to ultimately make it safe, is really, really hard.
Okay. All right. It's funny because I wrote down from memory chat CDK, and then I looked it up and I had, oh yeah, GPT. So yeah, I'm an expert on that. but it was one of the things I was going to ask you about. That's here's what it came up recently, and it kind of blew me away. So John Burns, you know who he is.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I asked him, I said, I wonder what the value of $11 trillion of mortgage debt is that was written for 30 years at, 4%, let's say.
Yeah.
I within 15 seconds, I get a response and he copies what Chat GPT said. And it was an explanation and then a formula that looked like it was crazy, some calculus formula, and gave you a book value of all of that. And of course, it probably was done in 3 seconds at 67 cents on the dollar. Now, that was kind of an aha moment for me because I'm just thinking, well, if it can respond to something that technical instantly, what the heck is it doing to some other industries?
I mean, yeah, it can write software. Like,
well, I've seen
it's really very impressive. But before people get too scared, here's the thing you have to remember, right? So it's gone out and it's consumed all this information basically on the internet, right? And so you have all these code repositories like, GitHub and other things that have example programming, and it's eaten all of that, right? And it kind of understands it, and it can start putting it in context, and it's incredible. But if you ask it something where there's no information about that thing on the internet, it can't answer, right? So when it can't think of new things that don't exist yet, it can't think of it, data that doesn't exist on the, so for example, if you ask it about real estate statistics, if somebody's published that particular statistic you're looking for, it will be able to essentially quote it or rephrase it. But if that statistic you're looking for is just in the raw data, it doesn't have access to all that raw data. It can't answer. So there's still major limitations in what it can and can't do. But, you want to ask about, which liens are wiped out in a foreclosure in Louisiana, right? Like it's going to, if it can find some references to that, it's going to give you a pretty good answer, probably a better answer than most humans.
Bruce, I have two questions for Sean really quick.
Okay.
One on the driving, does access to the internet or, being able to stay, connected have anything to do with, the car still being able to function? Like I go out to the desert and now there's no cell services. It's still going to be able to continue to service. And how, with the society and how reactive everybody is to media, how long before somebody gets run over or gets in an accident and, oh, it was the unmanned car?
Well, so keep in mind that we as humans kill people every day with cars, right? So the unmanned car kills somebody is the wrong measure. The right measure is, does it kill fewer people than human drivers do? There's a lot of really bad human drivers on the road, right? I personally know some that I'm waiting for them to kill somebody because they're such bad drivers, right? So, this is one of the problems, and it's also one of the problems just in media, right? Like the soundbite headlines, right? Like,
Right.
Oh, self-driving car kills somebody. Oh my God, self-driving cars are bad. But self-driving car kills one person, 1,000 fewer than people killed today. Oh, okay, that looks pretty good, right? So we need to be careful about how we consume that kind of information and how we think about it. Self-driving cars are going to kill people. There's no question, right? The question is, do they kill fewer people? And then on the connected thing, right? So one of the things that gets really powerful is you can take a large set of information and compile it down to algorithms that can be executed on very quickly. So this is, like the large language models and other things is how do you take large pieces of information and turn them into your $11 trillion mortgage question, right? And then it popped out a formula, right? So that's taking that question and you could go do line by line data analysis, but you can probably, turn it into a formula that gets you an approximation pretty quickly based on the existing data and what the trends we've seen and all the rest. So the cars, big picture, what I'm trying to say is we're going to see these things, that self-driving engine collapsed into algorithms that can live in the car and don't require connectedness. They can be improved with connectedness, and they can improve from learning from the cars around them. And this is where it gets really interesting, is when we start having the cars talk to each other, right? So we could have everybody traveling at 200 miles an hour, 6 inches apart, if all the cars are talking, right? And the car in the front, maybe has a lead car that's even farther, whatever. And they know everything that's coming because it's all happening in real time. And if there's any disruption, that instantly gets communicated back. So like there's so much that's possible, but right now, all these cars are self-driving by themselves. We get them talking to each other, it becomes even safer.
Since Elon Musk came up, what do you think? Do you have an opinion on his warning about pausing the AI learning?
It's not it's a debate we should definitely be having, and it should be the most important things Democrats and Republicans, that kind of thing should be the most important thing Democrats and Republicans are talking about and Congress is talking about. And we don't elect people smart enough to talk about these things. There's probably 2% of our elected officials that are smart enough to have real conversations about the things that matter for our future.
I remember when the mortgage crisis hit, and there was discussion on at the Senate and Congress, and they were trying to comprehend how the mortgages were funded and all that, and you realize, holy cow, you're making policies and you haven't got any clue.
And politicians still haven't taken enough blame for the 2008 crisis, right?
Right.
So it was the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act that repealed Glass-Steagall. We
Right.
still didn't put Glass-Steagall back in place. We didn't fix that after, and that was Gramm-Leach-Bliley, all Republicans, but signed by Clinton and Democrat, right? You had Commodity Futures Modernization Act, allowed these mortgage-backed securities and allowed these fake insurance products that had no backing behind them, right? And that still really hasn't changed. And again, Republicans and Democrats voted for that. I mean, and we didn't fix any of it.
Hey, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Norris Group Real Estate Radar Show and Podcast. Be sure to join us for part 2 of our conversation with Property Radar's Sean O'Toole.
For more information on hard money loans and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For information on passive investing with trust deeds, visit tngtrustdeeds.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under California DRE License 012-19911, Florida Mortgage Lender License 1577, and NMLS License 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the Hard Money tab.